Scientists discover 40,000-year-old human unaware he is still alive. Workers are excavating deep inside a frozen cave in the Arctic and find something stuck in the ice. They cut out a large block, and a helicopter takes it to a lab. The scientists send a fax to the excavation company asking them to stop drilling and requesting a specialist. Anthropologist Stanley arrives at the lab. He is a doctor who studies the history and culture of Eskimos and knows the Arctic well. He is introduced to Dr. Diane and the other scientists, who believe they have found a prehistoric animal. In 1898, the Russians found a mammoth with viable cells, so the team has high hopes. They use a laser to cut the ice block layer by layer and find that the creature inside is not an animal. It is a Neanderthal. Stanley studies his appearance and concludes he is a hunter who lived between 20 and 40,000 years ago. He wants to examine him more closely, but Diane says the plan is to cut the body into pieces and send the samples to research centers around the world. The scientists thaw the Neanderthal and remove his clothes and tools, then take tissue samples and connect him to monitors. The tests show his cells and organs are in perfect condition, and Diane theorizes that ancient humans had special cells that prevent crystallization. Then the monitors pick up light brain activity, and the team decides to try to revive him. They intubate him and use a defibrillator until they get a strong heartbeat. Once he is stable, they remove the tube, and the Neanderthal begins to wake up. He is confused by his surroundings and panics. Stanley removes his mask, and the Neanderthal calms down when he sees a human face, so the team puts him under with an injection. The group discusses the Neanderthal's future and talks about using him to unlock a method of freezing people to achieve immortality. Stanley disagrees and points out that humans should not live forever and that the world is already overpopulated, but his concerns are ignored. The scientists agree not to tell the press so the Neanderthal does not become a celebrity. Stanley argues that the man should be studied in a natural environment first, and after a lot of convincing, the team gives him 2 weeks to conduct his own research. A vivarium is set up, and the Neanderthal is placed inside. When he wakes up, he finds the environment familiar and settles into a routine. He drinks berry juice, chases a bird from its nest to take the eggs, and starts a fire with stones to cook his food. In the mornings, he washes under a waterfall and then goes hunting with a spear he builds himself. He makes noise to draw a wild boar toward him and dodges its charge at the last second, causing it to get wedged between rocks, and then kills it. While fishing, he finds a hose and breaks the end, confused by the metal. He sniffs and licks it and then follows it, pulling it out of the ground until he reaches a metal door. He shakes it open, and the scientists rush to seal a second door to stop him from getting further. The lab animals start making noise, and the scientists add to it to scare him off. He climbs the waterfall, finds the machine that powers it, and starts screaming and hitting the wall as he tries to destroy it. A scientist enters the vivarium and shoots him with a tranquilizer dart, and the team puts him on a stretcher to take him to an operating room for samples. Stanley protests that his 2 weeks are not up yet, but Diane tells him to accept the situation. That evening, Stanley shows Diane footage of different tribes dancing on flames without getting blisters. Diane says it is just a nerve block, and Stanley points out that only explains the lack of pain, not the lack of blisters. He shows her another clip of an indigenous man pushing needles into a friend's face with no blood, and theorizes that these people produce a chemical that protects their tissue. He argues the Neanderthal does the same and convinces Diane to let him continue. Once the Neanderthal is back in the vivarium, Stanley enters without weapons or objects. The Neanderthal runs around growling and finding cover, and Stanley approaches slowly until they are face to face. The Neanderthal jumps on Stanley and raises a rock to hit him, then gets distracted by a scientist yelling from above. Stanley does not try to defend himself, so the Neanderthal lowers the rock. He examines Stanley's body, puts fingers in his mouth, pulls at his clothes, and grabs his groin to check. Stanley screams, and the Neanderthal backs off, then introduces himself as Aru. Stanley changes the name to Charlie, teaches him to say Stanley in return, and gets Charlie to laugh. Stanley notices scars on Charlie's chest and asks about them, and Charlie points up and says, Beta. The shape of the scars and the gesture make Stanley think it means bird. Charlie steals Stanley's cross necklace and bites it and repeats some words and gestures, but Stanley cannot understand what he is trying to say. The next day, a linguist named Mabel arrives, and Stanley shows her the recording, but she needs more material to fully understand Charlie's language. Stanley spends time with Charlie and learns words for simple things like rock, frog, and bone, and Charlie shares his food with him. Stanley teaches him easy words in English. Mabel watches from the cameras and is impressed by Charlie's vocabulary. One night, they sit by a fire and Stanley sings. Charlie enjoys it and makes noises to sing along. The scientists put Charlie to sleep again and place him in a chamber at a very low temperature to try to activate the cryoprotectants. Stanley keeps protesting that they are killing Charlie and that he does not deserve to be treated like a lab rat. Charlie's heartbeat slows and the team has no choice but to pull him out. Back in the vivarium, Charlie yells at Stanley in anger about the experiments and new scars. He jumps and pretends to attack, hits the ground with his spear, and pokes his own chest. He is asking Stanley to help him end his life. Stanley refuses and leaves the vivarium. Stanley goes to Diane privately and explains that the experiments are pushing Charlie away and asks her to enter the vivarium with him, thinking a woman's presence might help. When they go in, Charlie's hands are wounded and he is using crushed rock to draw the bird from his scars on the ground. Diane gets nervous and Charlie runs toward her to get a closer look. He sniffs her and then shares his food with her, and she eats it to avoid offending him. Charlie starts touching her and being friendly. Stanley stops him and the two men argue until Stanley uses the Neanderthal word for mine and Charlie backs off. Charlie brings objects from his cave and tries to trade them for Diane, so Stanley turns him down. Charlie looks at Diane and a sadness comes over him, and he repeats the same words over and over. Mabel analyzes the recording and thinks she has found Charlie's word for woman, but there is something else she cannot work out. Stanley and Diane get Charlie to explain, and he draws on the ground, revealing he had a wife and children. He starts pacing and repeating the same words, and Diane realizes he is asking where his family is. A helicopter appears above the facility. The ceiling is glass, so Charlie sees it and starts climbing the rocks while repeating Beta. The scientists tell the helicopter to leave, but Charlie will not calm down and keeps screaming at the ceiling. Stanley visits an Eskimo tribe and shares the words he has learned from Charlie. The group recognizes them. Stanley rushes back and tells Diane that Beta refers to Sedna, a large bird in Eskimo legend that acts as a messenger between people and their god, carrying them to their fate after death. He theorizes that Charlie's tribe died when the magnetic pole shifted and killed all the animals in the area. Charlie likely believed it was punishment from his god and went on a ritual walk to offer himself in exchange for the animal's return. Now, Charlie believes the helicopter is Sedna, and there is no calming him. 34 hours later, Charlie is dressed in all his clothes and tools and items Stanley gave him over the past days. He uses crushed berries to paint his skin and chants without stopping. He is waiting for his god to return. Whenever Stanley enters the vivarium, Charlie hides and refuses to communicate. One afternoon, Charlie takes the stairs and presses the button he has watched Stanley press many times. He slips into the lab and moves carefully through the corridors. He reaches an empty hallway and finds a mirror and growls at his own reflection, then smashes it with his spear when he decides it is challenging him. He hears a voice through the speakers and runs in fear until he reaches a room full of lab animals. He checks out a bird in a cage, then a bear growls at him and he moves on. He walks into glass doors and crashes into them, then tries again and they open automatically. He hears a vehicle moving and hides behind a copy machine, then accidentally activates it and runs. The elevator startles him, and he enters a lab and knocks over a jar of acid that burns his hand. The scientists cut the lights, and Charlie panics. He climbs on the furniture, slipping and breaking equipment, and a scientist hears the noise and comes in and turns the lights back on. Charlie attacks and kills the scientist with his spear. He runs again, and the alarm goes off, and he bolts through a door and finds a tunnel that gets colder as he goes. He reaches a fire exit and pushes through it and makes it outside. He sees the helicopter and runs toward it, and the pilot hits him with the skis to knock him out. The scientists bring him back inside. X-rays confirm he has no broken bones or head injuries. The scientists blame Stanley for their colleague's death and announce the experiments are over. Charlie is to be transferred to another facility. Stanley argues that Charlie will die in a cage, but no one listens. He makes a deal with the guard at the door and slips into the vivarium with a bundle of furs. He dresses Charlie in them and takes him outside for a walk. The scientists notice they are gone and follow their footprints in the snow. Ice shelves start breaking and a crevasse opens in the ground and separates Stanley from Charlie. The helicopter finds them and Charlie sees it, yells "Beta" and jumps. He grabs onto the skis of the chopper and chants happily during the flight. One of the pilots reaches for him, and Charlie lets go of the skis and falls, gliding for a distance in the air before he meets his end.